So I'm going to start this one off. What are you guys' plans for like post-secondary education? Like there's a lot of, we'll bring it lower with like lower pricing, and there's some that have what they want to do with that. So let's just do like the one after that again, answering that question over here. Yeah.
Okay, well the first thing we did when we took over government is we changed from the Millennium Scholarship Plan to the Canada Scholarship Plan. What that did was it doubled the number of low and middle income Canadian students who were proceeding on to post-secondary education. The next thing we did is we looked, there was a tax advantage for textbooks. And we looked at some of the things like scholarships and bursaries. And we saw that a lot of students who were in post-secondary education, who had a good summer job or who had jobs through their university or college, that they also were paying tax. And we said, no, you shouldn't pay tax on bursaries. You shouldn't pay tax on this. We said you no longer have to pay tax. Then we looked at some of the other vehicles that families use in order to be able to provide education for their children. And we said one of those, of course, was the student loans program. We said we needed to make some changes there, and we did that. We also looked at the educational savings plans, and we as a matter of fact, I had some university kids come in and talk to me, students come in and talk to me. Basically said we need to make improvements there. So we made it easier to invest in that plan. We made the plan larger so that you could invest for a longer period of time for your education. So we made a lot of those investments so that there were different ways to help different areas where post-secondary education needed some more help, and we will continue doing that as time progresses.
Can everyone see, or is it easier if we stand up? Easier if we stand up? Yeah, I think so. I've talked a little bit about the Liberal platform in terms of the $1,000 a year for every year you successfully complete high school, and then that's taken off your tuition directly. I've also talked about the $1,500 off the federal student loan for doing community service work. We've, as I said earlier, we've had about 8 debates, and there's some interesting things that come out during those debates. And it was the Cobourg debate. I think Russ asked me a question about education, and I think that there's some discussion, further discussion that has to happen around not just, I mean, it's great to have the dollars off your tuition, no question. But there may be other ways that we need to have the discussion about how we do reduce tuition across the board. So it's not just for those who are expecting a certain degree of assistance with their education. So for instance, in our platform, I mentioned the $1,000, but if it's low income, it's $1,500. But there's still lots of other things that go along with post-secondary education besides tuition. And I gave the example of my daughter has gone back to school again, and she comes home by VIA. It's an affordable way to come home. It's better for the environment than you're driving your car back and forth. And she was just informed that VIA has taken away the subsidy for any student over the age of 25. So even though she has a student ISIC card and she is a full-time student at Queen's, she will, as of in a couple of months, no longer get the student discount for traveling. The other thing that they did is they took away something called the 6-packs. And for those of you who are going away to school next year, you'll find out about these. And it's like a discounted book that you get to use. And you could always buy them at reduced rates between Kingston and Cobourg. Well, now you can only use them between major cities. So between Kingston and Toronto or Kingston and Ottawa. Well, as a parent who'd like to see my child on occasion, and she'd like to come home, I'm sure, and get food and all those other things she will come home for, that's another cost. And VIA is a crown corporation. Something I think the government should look at is making sure that no matter what age you are as a student, if you're a student, you get those kinds of discounts. So those are other things I think, need to be on the table and we need to have a discussion about. Do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. But I think the key, certainly to myself and I would say to those of us who are going to talk to you about education, we want to have the discussion with you about what's important to you and what will work best for all of you. So that's, any other questions I'm happy to ask on the subject, or answer on the subject.
Yeah, the Green Party Light like the other parties, or at least some of the other parties, has a program to try and ease the financial stress that tuition costs that students are facing in tuition costs. In our case, it's a little different in the sense that we've gone through the budget that was tabled last month. We've identified actually billions of dollars that can be reallocated partly.
Can we have the ski and snowboarding clubs please come down?
Just give the skiers a minute to
evacuate.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that was it for this year. In our case, what we've done is we've proposed a fairly large fund, larger than any of the other parties, for spending by municipal governments, because we think that a lot of the opportunities for restarting the economy can be encouraged if municipal governments have support to address some of the economic and environmental issues that they're facing in ways that will help them make their communities more attractive to the businesses in the new economy and so on. So we have this fund, coupled with a thing that we're calling, a proposal that we're calling the Youth Employment Corps, which is, it's like a Peace Corps type of concept, except that you would put the time in, you would be paid, but it would be minimum wage, to put in a year in this Corps, at the end of which you would get a $4,000 tuition credit. So it's another variation of the kinds of creative ideas that people are coming up with for addressing the tuition problem. But having just put 2 kids through college, we budgeted $17,000 a year each for them to go to U of T, and that's more or less what it costs. You can't possibly make that back in summer employment unless you've got, if you've got a summer job that's good enough that you can save $17,000, you don't go back to school. Hang on to that job. So there's this deeper problem, is what I'm getting at, which is that there's an issue with the student debt that kids have coming out of just their first degree, never mind the second one. Many of them feel they have to get, so that their resume sort of stands out in the pile of everyone else's who has the bachelor degree. So the debts that we're looking at from graduates coming out of bachelor's and master's programs are measured in tens of thousands of dollars. And it's not necessarily going to make much difference whether you get $1,500 here or $4,000 there if we don't find a way to get the tuition costs down. And I'm probably setting this up for what Russ has to say. And then beyond that, as I mentioned in my opening comments, there's a post-secondary problem, which is you come out of these programs, you've got your degree, you've got your $20,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 debt, depending on how much your parents were willing and able to help you, and you can't find anything in your chosen profession. And that's, I think, a crisis which is developing, which has not been addressed in this election, but we see it here in Northumberland, Quinte West, with 25 to 35-year-olds who are living at home and are not finding a foothold in the new economy. And we don't have a national, none of the parties are addressing this in a direct head-on way, but personally I think what we need to do here in Northumberland is form what I think it's an emergency task force that is directly focused on the issue of finding, not necessarily jobs, but employment opportunities for graduates who are out there and are not finding an easy way to get started. Russ is giving me the boot, so take it away,
Sorry
Russ.
about that, Ralph.
We spent too much time.
I think there's 2 really important issues here. First of all, anyone who has the intelligence and works hard and gets decent marks should be able to go to a post-secondary institution. It shouldn't depend on how wealthy your family is. And what's happening now is only the wealthier families can send their kids to school. Only the wealthier families can save for RESPs, registered education savings plans. And what we need to do is quite simply, it's very practical and pragmatic, is decrease the cost of going to university. So the federal government, which has most of the taxing power because of income tax in the country, needs to transfer money to the provinces with strings attached. That money has to go to universities, colleges, trade schools to decrease the cost of going there. It's really straightforward so that everyone can gain access to it. In the country where my relatives are from, where my grandparents came from, Denmark, post-secondary education is free. You don't pay anything. As long as you have the marks and the ability and the intelligence, you go to the institution that you've been accepted to based on what your choice is. And they give you a living allowance of $1,500 a month to help you pay for books, food, clothing, housing, all the basic stuff. The other thing that students need is affordable housing, because it's not just the tuition. If you go to Toronto, good luck finding a decent place to stay at a decent rent. We need to build more cooperative student housing. There's fantastic examples of this right across the country. We export this idea all over the world. It's time as Canadians that we embrace that kind of Canadian leadership for cooperative student housing. It's a great thing to do. Now, the other thing, and Ralph mentioned this a little bit, once you graduate, what about the employment situation? Because, you get a university degree, and then you get some kind of low-wage service job at Walmart or a retailer or something like that. We need to create employment and opportunities which really happen a lot through small and medium-sized businesses. The big corporations don't actually create that many jobs. And that's why I've been saying over the course of this election, corporate tax cuts don't create jobs, period. So for young people who want to get involved, say, in environmental issues, renewable energy, the NDP has a platform that would bring in a cap-and-trade system, make the big polluters pay, like the big oil companies, the tar sands. That money would be put into incentives to develop renewable energy projects, solar, wind, hydro. Also, energy conservation for businesses and homes so that we can actually get that payback right away. That would create thousands and thousands of really good jobs for young people. So that's what we would do.
So we're in a grade 11 Native Studies class, and we were just wondering, we want to know what you feel are current Aboriginal issues going on in our community.
We started this sentence. Okay, great. I'm so glad that you've asked this question, because this is a subject that has not had enough discussion during this election. We have an Aboriginal community just up the road, Alderville, and I know the Economic Development Officer there, Dave Muller. And I'm glad to say they vote NDP up there because they know that party is for them and the Aboriginal community. I've worked in Aboriginal communities over the last 25 years. I've helped to start up wild rice harvesting cooperatives. The first fair trade product sold from Canada worldwide is from the Wabigoon Reserve near Kenora. I helped set that project up. It's still going 25 years later. Aboriginal communities have so many issues. They have issues around unemployment. They have issues around lack of proper housing, clean water, proper sanitation and wastewater systems, youth addiction, suicide rate, a teenage suicide rate that's right through the roof. We have really abandoned these people in our country. It's not okay. They live in, excuse the expression, third world conditions in one of the richest countries in the world. We are not helping to take care of these people. Yes, they're very proud people, and yes, they want to find employment. They don't want to be on welfare. Most people I've ever met who are on welfare don't want to be on welfare. They prefer to work. They prefer to do something creative. They prefer to provide for their own families. And that's what we need to do. We need to provide opportunities, training, education, and again, by cooperating together with First Nations communities, finding out exactly what their needs are on a community-by-community basis. There is no one-size-fits-all. We need to invest capital in those communities to provide decent housing. I saw a program on the national news the other day in northern Canada. 12 people living in one small little two-bedroom house with walls punched in. The wall hadn't been repaired for 20 years. They don't have the money to do it. They don't have one bottle of water, costs $8. They don't have the money for that. It's not acceptable. We can do a lot better. We can do it together.
I agree very strongly with everything that Russ has just said. I think it's too bad that his leader and none of the others raised these issues in the national debate, because they need to be raised. The Green Party, if you check our website, did a public release on this just yesterday, calling attention to the fact that the First Nations issues have not been raised effectively in this election campaign. It's shameful, the extent to which the kind of perspective that you've just heard from Russ is not being raised in the national campaigns of his or other parties, and which is not not being raised in the national debate. But having said that, much of what Russ, in fact, all of what Russ has said, I resonate with. Our party supports. We have put our money where our principles are in this. You'll see a line in our budget, and you pick one up, of an additional over and above current allocations, an additional $800 million to support Native and First Nation community infrastructure investments in affordable housing and water infrastructure, the issues that Russ has been referring to. So I'll try and regain some favor by taking less than my full time on this question.
Well, very good question. One of the things I was very fortunate enough to be a part of last week is Chief Jim Bob Marsden invited me to meet the National Grand Chief, Sean, I have trouble with his last name, Akimono, I believe. And what they did is they put on a day for, there was students from Lakehill College, and there were probably 120 people, as well as community members. And I was invited to come and listen to what some of the major needs were of the Aboriginal community, with particular focus on education. Because we do know that K-12 funding for each child is statistically less, they get less funding than the rest of the country does per child. We also know that they have, I believe it's a 49% graduation rate from high school compared to the rest of the country, so 50% lower almost than the rest of the country. So we know that those are issues. And it really was focused on education because from their perspective, they believe that addressing the education will address so many of the other challenges. We talked about what, certainly as Liberals, we have made a commitment. Some of you may have heard of the Kelowna Accord that was a monumental agreement between the provinces, territories, and First Nations that unfortunately was lost when we lost government. And within that agreement were a number of very important, let's say, solutions for the Aboriginal communities, and ones that they had embraced and were wanting to move forward on. I mean, one of the things that Sean told me, 75,000 Aboriginals live without clean drinking water in Canada. And we know that we've had crises around the world, you know, in Haiti and in Japan and other places where, as a country, we want to go and help, and we all understand that. But we do have crises within our own country. And I agree with Rob and Russ, it has not been addressed to the level that it needs to be. And certainly something I feel very strong in terms of that commitment. So I was very honored to be there. I feel that I was given an opportunity to get a real sort of national perspective as well as a local perspective on the issues. And I've made a commitment to work with them, and we've since had emails back and forth with clarification. So I think from a local perspective, that certainly got the ball rolling, but on a national level, we need to be discussing it more, no question.
Thank you very much. Actually, an excellent question, because we do have a First Nations territory right here in Northumberland, West. When we first took government, we realized there was one thing missing with our relationship with our First Nations, and that was an acknowledgement and an apology for the residential school issue, and that took place. And most of you would have seen, of course, that historic day when the chiefs and the First Nations came and sat right in the House of Commons and received that apology. The next thing, of course, was making sure that the settlement, residential school settlement, which was somewhere just above $2.3 billion, was paid out in a reasonable, after reasonable consultation, and to make sure it was done. So one of the first worries was that we were going to take, the government would take money out of that $2.3 billion to administer it. We actually didn't. We set aside several $100 million to make sure that that program went off as it should, and it did actually. The last numbers I saw, 76% of that $2.3 billion has been paid out. We also, of course, when we took government, we had a long list of schools that had black mold in them, that needed either upgrading or they needed to build new schools. So we allocated hundreds of millions of dollars for that. There were housing issues that you just heard, so we allocated over $400 and some odd million for those housing issues, and of course, new talk about right here in our own community. I was very pleased earlier on last fall to open up a $1 billion seniors residence for seniors on the reserve lands. Well received, and it was all federal money because the federal government's responsible for it. And Chief Marsden said they've been waiting years and years for that. So that was one of the action plans we did there. The Black Oak Savanna, that's very important to protect because it's an indigenous sector where there's flowers and various other things. So every year since I've been in office, we've made sure that sufficient money has gone to the Black Oak Savanna. We've also made sure that as a government, that we have a good relationship because, as you know, in the First Nations community, elders are a very, very important part. So they applied for and received a significant funding on the New Horizons for seniors. And that brings together seniors and First Nations youth to begin to talk about some of the history and some of the traditions that they've lost, which incorporates in itself pride as pride in their nation. So we've done that locally as a government. So we continue to fund I think at historic levels, our First Nations people. Yes, we have had historic, and I mean historic, just plain mistreatment of our First Nations people. But I think you can be proud as Canadians to know that in the past 25 to 30 years, that has been improving and improving greatly. I too worked in the north along the James and Hudson's Bay coast assisting with policing, and I can say that that there is definitely substandard housing in many of those communities, but we're bringing them up. There are wastewater plants, places like Fort Albany that have been refurbished and kept up. In Saskatchewan, there was as you know, some issues there, and that drank the water there. So some of those things have been improved. I just have to say that there is a lot of work to do, absolutely, and I will not blame anyone else other than we as a community need to just do the right thing and do everything we can in our power to make their life and make their contribution to Canada as a nation, because we're that much richer because of our First Nations brothers and sisters.
Go ahead there, Mitch.
I was questioning specifically for Mr. Tory. We all know that illegal substances, drugs are being used around Canada. Your party is looking to tax marijuana and legalize it. How do you plan on controlling that around the area?
Well, the plank in the platform that supports legalization of marijuana is actually a response to a feeling that there needs to be better control, that can be better done when it's inside the legal system than outside. There's also a line in our budget. I think we're the only party that has a very significant amount, tens of millions of dollars set aside for education and preventative education on marijuana misuse especially. So we think that by legalizing it, it actually makes it easier to control than leaving it outside the legal system without any real rules, except for one rule, that nobody can smoke it when everybody knows that it's widespread, the use is widespread in the population. When you get into a situation where you have widespread use of a substance like that, for the law to make criminals out of people who are smoking marijuana is not constructive. And it's going to be a much more constructive atmosphere to have this substance, like other substances for which we try to control and eliminate abuse. Alcohol and tobacco come to mind. Much better to have it inside the system than outside. And yes, it would then open up the possibility for control over the quality, which is a concern that any parent has who knows that their kids are smoking, is what kind of crap is in the dope they're getting. So that is a problem. There can be better controls when it's inside the legal system. And yes, you can tax it and use that money to mount the programs for education so that people understand just how dangerous the misuse of this substance can be. I'm sure many of you have friends who are smoking too much. You can see what it does to their heads. And again, I just think it'll be easier for us to tackle that problem by having it inside the legal system than having it outside where everybody touches it is criminal.
Well, it wouldn't shock you, you're not going to fall off your seat if I tell you that I'm not in favor of it. I'm not in favor of legalization for very many reasons. Number one, you're asking to legalize a substance that if you smoke it, you shouldn't drive. Yet the police, the laws in this country have no means by which to test the amount of THC that's in your system. We know alcohol is one of the most studied. Now I'm talking about, I'll touch on the societal issues. I'm just talking about the practical issues. You know, I sit on the Public Safety and National Security Committee, and we had a mother who was who had very many degrees after her name, who believed that every single solitary drug and substance out there should be controlled by the government and sold. Something, well, you guys wouldn't remember this, but in the old liquor control board where you'd go in and all have so much ecstasy and so on. Listen, we have 2 drugs that have been the scourge of our society for years, and they're legal. You know, it was mentioned that, well, we don't know what kind of stuff is in our marijuana. Well, we know that it's about 5 times more potent than it was when it first came on the scene about 20 or 25 years. It's been around a long time, but it's because we're pretty good at, Canada's pretty good at producing some of the most potent marijuana out there. But what does that mean? That means that it takes less of it to get you where you don't want to be. Think of all the lung cancers from just tobacco. You talk about crap that's in smoke. Look at tobacco, and our government's done some things there. And alcohol, the multi-billions of dollars that alcohol has caused our society because people have alcoholism, which is an addiction. And they manage it, you know, So what we want to do is create just one more substance that we can create more societal issues with it. Now, we already have some societal issues with marijuana. Yes, people do go to jail if they try to sell it to kids and you know, use too much of it and sell it and those other things. I think you need to think long and hard. We have 2 substances now that are legal that have caused havoc in our society. Why must we search out more and more things to make legal? Because we have more and more problems and more things to make our lives more miserable. We should just, to me, we just need to think long and hard about, should we even be legalizing, you know, alcohol and tobacco? I brought in, when I was a police officer here in Northumberland, brought in the DARE program that I think some of you may be a little bit older, but it was in grade 6. And the DARE program is trying to tell our young people alcohol and tobacco are even bad. So, you know, we don't need another huge albatross around our neck when we talk about things like alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs.
Can I just make a quick comment? It'll be quick. You know, there's a lot of people across Canada and indeed the world who have particular medical conditions or illnesses. And the only thing that they get any relief from at all is from marijuana. And our country has, I think, wisely made a decision to have a program to provide medical marijuana to those people, right? So that they can get some relief from their pain and from their illnesses. Now, one of the problems with that is when you have that kind of very stern approach that Rick has to it, there isn't any room for some of these gray areas. And so a lot of those people who need medical marijuana would be suffering, and they are suffering, because the system that's been set up by the federal government, it's so hard to get access to medical marijuana that those people continue to suffer. That's just an example, you know. Things in the world aren't black and white. We really need to think what's pragmatic, what really works for people, and then design a system so that it can deliver what people need. And that's just one example.
Russ raises a very good point about the medical marijuana. There was a court decision just not that long ago that has opened up this challenge again. People are having a very difficult time accessing it. So in theory, it's a great thing, but the access is an issue. I'm not at the point where I think we should be legalizing it. But having said that, I mean, there's lots of discussion going on, and people didn't think alcohol should be legalized going back a good number of years ago either. So things progress and things change. Right now, I'm not in the position where it should be legalized. However, I will say that I'm also not in support of some of the proposed legislation by the current government that says that if you're a university student and you happen to have 6 plants growing in your window because you just moved away from home and this seems like a good idea, that you can then be criminally charged and have a mandatory 6 months in jail, lose your education, end up with a criminal record, and frankly, you're not going to have a very good outlook for your future with that as your first stepping stone sort of into your next part of your life. So while I'm not at the point where I'm in favor of legalizing it, I do support the needs and a much easier system for the medical marijuana side. And I'm absolutely not in favor of the new proposal of 6-month mandatory for growing for what I